You wake up before dawn in January. There's no central heating, no electric blanket, no thermostat to nudge up a few degrees. The only thing standing between you and freezing to death is a pile of embers you managed to keep alive through the night, and whatever wool you had the sense to sleep in. That's a medieval winter morning, every single morning, for months on end. So let's talk about what that actually looked like and felt like for ordinary people living in northern England around 1350. The onset of the Little Ice Age, which began around 1300 and lasted for centuries, meant that medieval winters were colder and more unpredictable than anything Europeans today would recognize as normal. This was not a minor inconvenience. This was a season where hunger, illness, and exposure were genuine threats to survival, and where the decisions made in autumn could determine whether your family made it to spring. This is an AI reconstruction of what one of those days looked like from 4 in the morning until the next 4 in the morning, and it is not a comfortable story. Let's start with the building itself, because the house is really the front line in the battle against winter cold, and for most people, it was not winning. A typical peasant cottage in 14th century northern England was built from timber framing packed with wattle-and-daub, woven sticks covered in a mix of clay, straw, and dung. It kept out the worst of the wind, mostly. The roof was thatch, which is actually decent insulation when it's dry, but in an English winter it is rarely dry for long. There were no glass windows. Wooden shutters blocked the drafts reasonably well, as long as you didn't mind blocking out all the light, too. The hearth sat at the center of the main room, not because it was charming, but because it was survival. Most ordinary homes didn't have a chimney in the modern sense. Smoke drifted upward through ventilation holes in the roof, which meant that the rafters turned black with soot and the people inside spent the winter perpetually smelling of smoke. You got used to it. You didn't have much choice. And then there were the animals. Goats, chickens, pigs, kept in an adjacent shed or sometimes separated from the family's living space by just a wattle partition. This wasn't a quaint farmyard arrangement, it was a practical heat strategy. Animal bodies generate warmth, and in a house that size, even 2 goats made a measurable difference on the coldest nights. Was it noisy? Yes. Was it smelly? Extraordinarily. Did it beat freezing? Absolutely. The family were following wakes, or rather, the wife wakes, well before dawn. Not because of an alarm, but because her body has simply learned that this is when the fire needs attention. The embers from the previous night are still faintly glowing beneath a layer of ash, and she coaxes them back to life with small twigs and careful breath. A small flame catches. She feeds it slowly. Getting this wrong is not a small inconvenience. Without fire, there is no warmth, no cooked food, no way to melt ice for water, no light. Every household member understands this. Even the youngest children know that the fire does not go out. Fuel is gathered and stored through the warmer months and whenever it can be had, and every log burned in January is one that cannot be burned in February, when the cold often gets worse. While the fire rebuilds, she hangs a clay pot over the flames and adds oats and salt. This pottage is breakfast. It is also, on many mornings, lunch. It is not exciting. Nobody was under any illusion that it was exciting. But it was hot and filling, and in a house where the temperature had hovered just above freezing all night, hot and filling was everything. Her husband, meanwhile, layers up. Linen against the skin first, then wool, because wool is warm even when wet, which matters in a climate like this, then a heavy cloak and boots, worn leather patched repeatedly because boots are expensive and you do not waste them. Then he steps outside. The air in January at that hour in northern England is, in a word, brutal. His breath fogs white, frost covers every surface, and before he eats a single bite of his own breakfast, he goes to check the animals. Their water has frozen overnight, it always does, and he breaks the ice and refills the trough, then scatters grain in amounts calculated carefully, because too little and the animals weaken, too much and the family's own stores run short before the thaw. By the time pale light starts to show on the eastern horizon, the cottage is already in full operation. The wife's daughter is carding wool by the fire, combing raw fleece into smooth, aligned fibers that can be spun into thread. The boys tend the hearth. The wife herself is kneading a coarse, dark loaf dough, often a mixed grain bread made from whatever the household can mill, wheat blended with rye or other grains, hands working the dense mixture with the confidence of someone who has done this particular task several thousand times. Between tasks, she checks the stores, sacks of grain along the wall, a barrel of dried peas, strings of dried fish and salted pork hanging from the rafters, preserved by salting, smoking, and drying, methods that can keep food usable for months when done correctly. Herbs gathered in summer, now dry and faded but still useful for flavoring the endless rotation of pottage. She looks at all of this and does the calculation that every household in the village is doing. How long does this last, and when does the hungry gap hit? The hungry gap is the stretch from late winter into spring, often thought of as late February through May, when last autumn's stores are running low and the new season's crops still don't exist yet. It is one of the most dangerous parts of the year. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 grew out of a hungry gap that didn't end. Unusually heavy, persistent rains and repeated harvest failures pushed food prices up, weakened bodies, and turned scarcity into catastrophe, with recovery in many places taking years and often dated to around 1322. Historians debate the death toll, but in many towns and cities, mortality is often discussed in the range of roughly 10 to 25%, varying sharply by region. For our family in 1350, that famine sits within living memory, something the older villagers can still recall, and everyone else has heard described with the kind of detail that makes the story feel present. The calculation at the grain sacks is not abstract. It is survival arithmetic. By mid-morning, the village has settled into its daily rhythms, and it is worth stepping back to look at it as a whole, because winter changes the shape of community life. The blacksmith's forge, for instance, becomes one of the warmest buildings in the settlement, a fact that is not lost on anyone, and which explains why neighbors find reasons to visit the blacksmith in January that they wouldn't bother with in July. The church, built of stone rather than wattle and daub, stays cold longer, and even when it is warmed for a service, the chill clings to the walls. Still, it can feel steadier than a drafty cottage, and the elderly, in particular, drift toward it when it is open during the day. At the manor house, the Lord Steward has called a meeting to remind the villagers of their winter obligations: fire watch when required, mill repairs before the spring thaw, firewood deliveries to the manor. These duties do not pause for winter. They are part of the feudal arrangement, the price of access to common land and resources, and the villagers listen with the impassive faces of people who have heard this speech before and will hear it again. The midday meal is the main event of the day, and the family eats gathered near the hearth: pottage thickened with dried peas, barley, a piece of salted pork used sparingly, a turnip from the root cellar, flatbread cooked on hot stones. There is no variety, there is no ceremony. There is warmth and fullness, and the brief comfort of having enough for now. This is where the urgency really shows. In midwinter at this latitude, usable daylight lasts closer to 7 or 8 hours, and by 2 in the afternoon, it is already clearly running out. Everything that needs to be done outside must happen now. The husband is on a ladder repairing the thatch where winter storms have loosened it. A gap in the roof left unfixed is a gap that lets in rain and cold air and can, in the worst case, become a structural problem. His neighbor is patching wattle-and-daub walls with fresh daub mixture. Both men work with the focused speed of people who know the light is leaving. Inside, the women and older children spin, mend, and practice the crafts that winter evenings were made for. The word spinster, which today means something else entirely, originally just described what many women did during winter. They spun. Generation after generation, skills and stories passed by firelight from mother to daughter. The church bell rings for evening prayers in the late afternoon, and it marks the community's familiar signal that daylight work is ending. Many people don't go to the service. It's cold out, and the cottage fire is warm, and the walk is short, but for some, unnecessary. Night in a medieval winter is something worth dwelling on because it is not like modern darkness. There are no streetlights, no lit windows across the road, no glow from a phone screen or a television. When the shutters close and the sun goes down, it is completely dark outside, and the only light in the world, your world, the immediate world of the cottage, is the fire. One of the older men tells a tale from the winter of 1363 to 1364, when most of the major rivers of Europe froze solid between December and March. The Rhine at Mainz was frozen for 70 days. The town of Cologne held a market on the ice. The family prepares for sleep. The wife spreads ash carefully over the coals to preserve their heat. The children piled together under their cloaks. The husband and wife lie down fully clothed and talk quietly about the grain stores and whether portions should be reduced, and then exhaustion takes them. Here is something that might surprise you. Medieval people didn't sleep the way we do. Historical evidence, court records, diaries, medical writing suggests that many people slept in two distinct segments, waking for an hour or more in the middle of the night before returning to sleep. This wasn't insomnia, it was normal. That waking period was used for prayer, for talking, for quiet thinking, for tending the fire. The husband rises around midnight, adds a log to the dying hearth, and sits with his wife in the revived warmth for a while. Outside, a watchman makes his rounds with a lantern, fulfilling the night watch obligation that every household in the village took turns providing. His job is to watch for fire and theft. In every other cottage, variations of the same fragmented night unfold. Around 4 in the morning, the wife opens her eyes. The embers have burned low. She rises, wraps her cloak around her, kneels at the hearth, and begins to coax the fire back to life. The same motions, the same cold, the same quiet determination. And this repeats, not just tomorrow, but every day until the thaw comes, every day that the hungry gap is survived, every day that the woodpile holds out. For the medievals, in the depths of winter, death was never very far away, but neither was the fire. And they knew better than most people who have ever lived exactly what it was worth. If you found this reconstruction compelling, considering subscribing to this channel. And if there is another moment in history you would like to see reconstructed, let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me on this journey into a medieval winter.